let's get right into it. Today, we're doing a deep dive into exercise fatigue and recovery, and we're going to be using a research article called Exercise Fatigue, Mechanisms, Recovery, and Protocols as our guide. We'll be looking at why you feel drained after a workout, debunking some recovery myths, and, most importantly, giving you a solid plan so you can recover faster and get back to doing the things that you love.
I think a lot of people just kind of accept fatigue as, just a natural part of working out.
Mhm.
But understanding the science behind it can actually really change how you approach fitness, especially when you consider the link between fatigue and injury.
That's a really good point. I've definitely noticed that for myself. When I'm feeling run down, that's usually when I'm more susceptible to like little tweaks or strains. Does that connection come up in the research at all?
Oh, absolutely. This article highlights a pretty concerning statistic. A significant percentage of injuries, especially in competitive sports, happen in like the second half of games or practices.
Mm.
So it makes you think, maybe pushing through fatigue isn't as heroic as we might sometimes make it out to be.
Okay, so ignoring fatigue is a recipe for disaster.
Mm-hmm.
But what exactly is fatigue? I mean, is it just as simple as feeling tired, or is there something more to it?
It's a lot more complex than just that feeling of being tired. The research breaks fatigue down into two main types: central fatigue and peripheral fatigue. So central fatigue is the one that originates in your brain and your nervous system. It's almost like your brain steps in at some point and says, all right, we need to kind of dial things back,
Mm-hmm.
before we do some real damage.
Oh, wow. So my muscles might still be able to go further, but my brain is putting on the brakes. I always thought it was the muscles giving out first. That's wild.
Yeah, it's kind of a protective mechanism your body has in place. And then you have peripheral fatigue, which is all about what's happening in the muscles themselves. Microscopic damage, inflammation, and depletion of energy stores. It's essentially your muscles saying, all right, enough is enough.
Makes sense. I guess all those high-intensity workouts do have a cost, but so it's not just about muscle soreness, right? I know the research mentions a couple other factors that contribute to fatigue, like glycogen depletion and dehydration.
Yeah, exactly. And even things like, mental fatigue and sleep deprivation, they can all play a role. It's kind of this complex web of factors that we need to address for effective recovery.
And speaking of recovery, that's really what caught my eye in this research. I always thought that 24 hours was enough time to kind of bounce back, after a tough workout. But this article says that it can take up to 4 days for full recovery. That's crazy.
Yeah, it really challenges that kind of go hard every day mentality that so many of us have, especially when you consider that the research also shows a significantly higher risk of injury when there's less than 6 days between intense exercise sessions.
Wow, that's a really strong argument for prioritizing rest and recovery. I'm starting to understand why this research calls for a complete overhaul of how we approach recovery. But where do we even begin with that? What does a science-backed recovery protocol actually look like?
Well, I think hydration is always a good place to start. The research makes it pretty clear that, replenishing fluids and electrolytes immediately after exercise is non-negotiable.
Okay, so step one, chug water. Got it.
Yeah.
But I've also heard that electrolytes are really important, so what's the best way to make sure I'm getting enough of those?
The article recommends aiming for about 150% of your sweat loss. And here's the thing, a lot of people don't realize this. Make sure your drink also includes a decent amount of sodium, around 500 to 700 milligrams per liter of water.
Really? So sodium is actually important. I always thought it was something we were supposed to be trying to avoid.
Yeah, sodium tends to get a bad rap, but it's really crucial for fluid retention. It can even help your body absorb glucose better. So, having a sports drink or even just adding a pinch of salt to your water can actually make a really big difference.
Interesting. I'm definitely going to have to rethink how I hydrate after my workouts. What about nutrition? What should we be eating to refuel after a workout?
The research emphasizes getting both carbs and protein within an hour of finishing your workout. Specifically, they recommend 1.2 grams of carbs per kilogram of body weight every hour for up to 5 hours after you finish exercising.
Wow, that's a lot more carbs than I usually eat after I exercise. What's the thinking behind that?
It's really all about replenishing those depleted glycogen stores. You're giving your body the energy that it needs to recover and repair those muscles. And for protein, aim for about 20 grams of milk protein in the first 2 hours. It's a great way to kind of kickstart that muscle protein synthesis.
You know what? So that chocolate milk craving I get after my workouts is actually backed by science? I'm all for a science-backed indulgence.
Absolutely. Flavored milk is honestly a really effective recovery drink. While we're talking about drinks, the research also suggests adding some antioxidant-rich juices into the mix.
What kind of juices are we talking about?
Tart cherry, Berry or tomato juice are all great options.
Mm-hmm.
They're packed with antioxidants which can help fight inflammation and oxidative stress, which are often byproducts of really intense exercise.
Okay, so we've got hydration, nutrition, and antioxidant boosts all covered. What other recovery strategies does the research recommend?
Well, this next one might take some willpower, but trust me, it's worth it. Cold water immersion.
You mean like an ice bath? I've heard about those. Those sound kind of brutal.
They can be a bit shocking at first, but research suggests that immersing yourself in cold water, somewhere around 12 to 15 degrees Celsius for about 10 to 20 minutes, ideally right after exercise, can really help reduce muscle soreness and inflammation.
So there is actually some science behind the whole ice bath thing. You've almost convinced me to give it a try.
Yeah, if you're really looking to speed up recovery, it's worth considering. But if ice baths really aren't your thing, there's another really important recovery strategy that everyone has access to: sleep.
Sleep, the ultimate reset button. I feel like a lot of people underestimate how important sleep is for recovery, though.
I agree, and the research really drives that point home. Getting less than 7 hours of sleep a night can triple your risk of infections and double your risk of injury.
Wow, those are some pretty scary statistics. I'll admit I'm definitely guilty of skimping on sleep sometimes, but it sounds like that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and it's not just about feeling rested. It's about giving your body that time that it needs to repair and rebuild. A lot of those recovery processes really happen while you're asleep.
Okay, so we've covered the essentials: hydration, nutrition, sleep, and even a cold plunge. I am curious, though, about some other popular recovery methods out there. What about active recovery? Does light exercise really help speed up the process?
That's a good question, and the research actually touches on that. It turns out that active recovery might not offer any additional benefits compared to just resting.
So sometimes doing less is more.
Exactly. And here's another one that might surprise you: massage. While it can definitely feel really good and might even have some psychological benefits, the evidence for its impact on actual physical recovery is pretty limited.
Interesting. So a massage might make me feel better, but it's not necessarily speeding up the recovery process.
That seems to be the current consensus based on the research.
Okay, good to know. What about stretching? I always make sure to stretch after a workout. Surely that helps with recovery, right?
I used to think so too,
Hmm.
but the research suggests that stretching hasn't been definitively proven to enhance recovery or reduce soreness.
Really? So all that time I spend stretching might not actually be as beneficial as I thought?
Well, it might help with flexibility and range of motion, but it might not be the recovery miracle that we once thought it was.
Wow, this research is full of surprises.
It is. There's actually one more recovery method I wanted to mention: compression garments.
You mean like those tight-fitting sleeves or leggings that you see athletes wearing a lot? Do those actually do anything?
Studies have shown that they can have a moderate positive effect on muscle strength recovery and help reduce soreness. But there's a bit of a mystery surrounding them, because the research also suggests a possible placebo effect. So we're not totally sure if it's the compression itself or the belief that it's helping.
That's fascinating. So the power of the mind might actually play a role in recovery as well.
It seems that way, which really brings us to an important point: the psychological side of recovery. Our mental and emotional state can have a huge impact on how we bounce back from physical exertion.
That is super insightful. Before we move on to the psychological aspects of recovery, can we just quickly recap those key steps in the recovery protocol?
Of course, so the foundation is really hydration. Drinking plenty of fluids with electrolytes, ideally right after you finish exercising. Then make sure to refuel with a good combination of carbohydrates and protein within an hour of finishing your workout.
And don't forget those antioxidant-rich juices like tart cherry or berry juice to combat inflammation.
Right, and if you're up for it, a cold plunge can be a real game changer for reducing soreness and helping you recover more quickly.
And of course, prioritize sleep. Make sure you're getting at least 7 hours of quality sleep every night to give your body the time that it needs to rebuild and recover.
Exactly. And while things like active recovery, massage, and stretching might have their place, the science supporting their effectiveness for physical recovery is still kind of up in the air.
Well, this deep dive into exercise fatigue and recovery has been really eye-opening. It's so clear that our bodies are incredibly complex and we need to be really intentional about how we approach recovery.
I couldn't agree more. It really makes you wonder, if fatigue plays such a big role in injuries, shouldn't we be prioritizing recovery just as much as we prioritize training?
It's definitely something to think about. We'll be right back to explore the psychological side of recovery and how our mindset can impact our ability to bounce back after those tough workouts. Welcome back to our deep dive into exercise fatigue and recovery.
In part one, we talked about how ignoring fatigue can lead to injuries and how important those first few hours after a workout are for kicking off that recovery process.
Right, we covered a lot of practical stuff like hydration, nutrition, and sleep. But you also mentioned that fatigue isn't just about, what's happening in our muscles. It's also about our brains. I'm really curious to learn more about that.
Absolutely. The research really dives into how our brains play a crucial role in fatigue, especially something called central fatigue, which we touched on earlier.
Okay, yeah, remind me what exactly is central fatigue again?
Think of it as your brain acting as kind of a safety mechanism. As you exercise and your body starts working harder, your brain's receiving all these signals about things like, your body temperature increasing, muscle fatigue, energy depletion.
So my brain is basically monitoring what's going on in my body during a workout.
Exactly. And based on those signals, your brain might start to actually limit the signals that are being sent to your muscles, essentially reducing their power output, even if they could technically keep going.
Oh, wow. So my muscles might physically be able to push further,
Yeah,
but my brain is saying, nope, we're done.
exactly. It's like your brain is saying, let's avoid a total system meltdown here.
Hmm.
It's really prioritizing your long-term well-being over those short-term gains.
That's actually pretty amazing. It's like having this built-in safeguard system.
Hmm.
But how does my brain even know when to step in? What are those signals that it's paying attention to?
Researchers believe it's a combination of factors, including things like your core body temperature, your blood glucose levels,
Right.
and even how much effort you perceive yourself to be exerting.
Oh, so it's not just about my physical limits. It's also about how hard I feel like I'm working.
Exactly. If your brain senses that you're working really hard, even if your body isn't actually at a critical point yet, it might start to dial things back to prevent you from pushing too far.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
I know for me, sometimes I mentally check out of a workout before my body is actually exhausted. Maybe that's my brain kicking in and saying, all right, time to wrap things up.
It very well could be, yeah. This idea is actually known as the central governor theory,
Yeah.
which suggests that our brains have this built-in governor that limits our physical output
Mm.
to kind of keep us from reaching a point where we could cause some serious damage.
So even when I think I'm hitting my physical limits, it might actually be my brain that's really calling the shots. It's like a mental game as much as it is a physical one.
Absolutely. It really highlights the complex interplay between our minds and our bodies, especially when it comes to fatigue and recovery.
This is so interesting, but how does understanding central fatigue and, this whole central governor theory actually help us recover better? Like, what can we actually do with this information?
That's a great question. While we're still learning a lot about these systems, research suggests that a lot of the recovery strategies that we talked about in part one can actually have a positive impact on how our brains regulate fatigue.
Really? So things like hydration, nutrition, sleep, those can actually influence my brain's fatigue response.
Exactly. For example, let's take hydration. Dehydration can actually amplify the signals that lead to that central fatigue. When you're dehydrated, your blood volume decreases, and that can actually reduce blood flow to the brain.
Okay, so less blood flow to the brain. Why is that a problem?
Well, your brain needs a constant supply of oxygen and nutrients to function properly. And when that supply is reduced, it can impact your brain's ability to effectively regulate fatigue,
Mhm.
making you feel more tired and slowing down your recovery.
So dehydration is kind of a double whammy then. It's affecting my muscles and my brain's ability to manage fatigue.
Exactly. And on the flip side, staying properly hydrated can help make sure that your brain is functioning at its best, which in turn can help regulate those fatigue signals and maybe even improve your performance.
I see how all of these recovery strategies are really connected. What about nutrition? How does what we eat affect our brains when it comes to fatigue?
Think of it this way. Your brain needs a constant supply of nutrients, especially carbohydrates, to function properly. When your blood sugar levels drop, it can actually impair your brain's ability to regulate fatigue and even affect your mood and motivation.
Okay, so that post-workout meal isn't just about refueling my muscles. It's also giving my brain what it needs to manage fatigue and help me recover better.
Exactly. And protein also plays a role here, providing those building blocks for neurotransmitters, which are those chemical messengers in your brain that really play a key role in everything from your mood to your motivation levels to even fatigue.
This is all starting to make so much more sense now. It's like this whole chain reaction where everything is connected.
Exactly. And we can't forget about sleep. Sleep is crucial for restoring and balancing those neurotransmitter levels in the brain.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that If I haven't slept well, I'm way more irritable and just not as motivated to exercise.
That's a really common experience. During sleep, your brain's actually busy clearing out those metabolic byproducts that build up throughout the day, including ones that can contribute to fatigue. And when you don't get enough sleep, those byproducts can start to accumulate, leading to increased fatigue and even impacting your physical and mental performance.
Wow, so getting enough sleep is like giving my brain a chance to clean up and reset itself.
That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
And a well-rested brain is definitely better equipped to handle fatigue and support that overall recovery process.
Okay, so hydration, nutrition, and sleep all play a big role in how our brains manage fatigue. What about that cold water immersion that we talked about earlier? Does that have any effect on our brains as well?
Research suggests that cold water immersion can actually help decrease our perception of fatigue by reducing inflammation and promoting blood flow, including blood flow to the brain.
So that feeling of alertness and energy after a cold plunge isn't just a placebo effect.
Exactly. There's a real physiological basis for it. That increased blood flow means more oxygen and nutrients are reaching your brain, which can help support its function and potentially even enhance those recovery processes we've been talking about.
This is all so mind-blowing. It's amazing to think about how these fairly simple recovery strategies can have such a big impact on both our bodies and our brains.
It really is. It highlights just how important it is to take a really holistic approach to recovery, addressing both the physical and the psychological aspects.
And speaking of the psychological side of recovery, I'm really interested to learn more about that. It sounds like our mental state can play a pretty big role in how well we bounce back from those tough workouts.
It definitely can. Our mindset, our motivation, even our social connections can all significantly impact that recovery process.
Well, I'm excited to dive into that. We'll be right back to explore this fascinating world of the psychology of recovery. Welcome back. We've covered so much in this deep dive already, everything from the science behind fatigue to the importance of hydration, nutrition, and sleep. But now I'm ready to tackle the mental game, the psychology of recovery.
It's interesting how we tend to focus a lot on those physical aspects of recovery, but our mental and emotional state can play such a huge role in how quickly and effectively we bounce back.
Yeah, that's so true. I can think of times when I felt like physically I was ready to work out, but mentally I just wasn't there, and those workouts never seemed to go very well.
Exactly, and that's a perfect example of how much our minds can really influence our physical performance and our recovery.
Yeah.
One of the key areas that the research explores, it's the power of self-talk.
Self-talk, you mean like that little voice in my head that's always commenting on what I'm doing?
Yeah, exactly, and it turns out that the tone and content of our self-talk can actually have a big impact on our recovery. If we're constantly, kind of beating ourselves up and focusing on how sore we are
Mm.
or doubting our ability to bounce back, we're actually creating more stress and potentially even hindering our recovery.
So negative self-talk is basically like adding fuel to the fire of fatigue.
Exactly. On the flip side, if we can cultivate a more positive and supportive inner dialogue,
Hmm.
that can actually enhance our recovery.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we go from like, ugh, I'm so sore, I'm never going to recover from this, to a more positive mindset?
I think the first step is awareness. Just start paying attention to the types of thoughts that you're having
Hmm.
about your workouts and your recovery. And once you're aware of those negative thought patterns, you can start to challenge them and reframe them.
So instead of thinking about how sore I am, maybe I could try focusing on how much stronger my muscles are getting or how good it feels to be taking care of my body.
Exactly. By shifting your focus to those positive aspects of recovery and acknowledging your body's natural ability to heal,
Mm.
you can really create a much more supportive mental environment for recovery.
I love that. It's like becoming your own cheerleader. But, sometimes even with positive self-talk, I still struggle to stay motivated, especially when I'm feeling tired or sore. Is there anything else I can do to kind of boost my motivation and really prioritize recovery?
I think that's where social connection really comes in.
Hmm.
The research highlights how important it is to have a strong support system, whether it's friends, family, teammates, or even like an online community.
So it's not just about what I'm doing individually, it's also about the people that I surround myself with.
Absolutely, sharing your fitness goals with others, getting encouragement from people who really understand the challenges and celebrating each other's successes can make a huge difference in your motivation and resilience.
That's true. I've noticed that when I work out with a friend, I'm way more likely to really push myself and then also take the time to stretch and cool down afterward.
Exactly, and that sense of accountability and shared purpose can be really motivating. Plus, when you're feeling tired or kind of discouraged, Having that supportive community to lean on can really help you stay on track with those recovery goals.
Yeah, it's like they say, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together.
Yeah.
But even with a great support system, staying motivated over the long term can be tough. Are there any other strategies that can help with that?
One of the most effective strategies is to really focus on intrinsic motivation, finding activities that you genuinely enjoy and that give you a sense of satisfaction.
So it's not about forcing myself to do these workouts that I dread. It's
Yeah.
about finding things that I actually look forward to doing.
Exactly. When you're intrinsically motivated, you're more likely to stick with your fitness routine and to really prioritize recovery because you see it as a key part of something that you love.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm guessing setting realistic goals is also important. I know I've definitely been guilty of setting those super ambitious goals and then feeling discouraged when I don't see results like right away.
I think we've all been there. Setting unrealistic goals can lead to burnout and make recovery feel like a chore. The research really emphasizes the importance of setting those small, achievable goals that allow you to experience a sense of accomplishment along the way.
So maybe instead of trying to completely transform my fitness overnight, I should just focus on, making small, consistent improvements over time.
Exactly. And when you break down those larger goals into smaller
Yeah.
steps, it makes the whole process, including recovery, feel less daunting and more manageable.
This deep dive into exercise fatigue and recovery has honestly been so insightful. I feel like I have a totally new perspective on how to approach my workouts and my recovery, both physically and mentally.
I feel the same way. And I hope our listeners feel empowered to really prioritize their own well-being both on and off the track, the field, or wherever their fitness journey takes them.
Remember, fatigue is a totally natural part of the process, but with the right knowledge and strategies, we can all recover faster, stronger, and more resilient than ever before. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into exercise, fatigue, and recovery.